When a devoted mother vanishes, her sudden disappearance uncovers a shallow earthen pit hidden right beside a bustling corporate office. Wrapped in an office window curtain with a single designer button left behind as a clue, this baffling mystery exposes the deceptive double life of a seemingly perfect family. Please like and subscribe to join us on this case. This video contains chilling secrets. Viewer discretion is advised. Wuhan City, the sprawling capital of Hubei Province, is a massive hub of commerce, education, and heavy industry in central China. Amidst the relentless hum of automobile manufacturing and the constant flow of the Yangtze River, millions of people go about their daily routines, completely anonymous in the crowd. But on May 24, 2016, this bustling metropolis became the backdrop for a chilling disappearance that would slowly unravel the dark secrets of a seemingly perfect family. It started with a frantic phone call to the Jing'an District Police Station. The man on the line, Zheng Boshao, was desperate. His wife, a 28-year-old woman named Li Xiaojuan, had vanished. She had been unreachable since the previous day, and her sudden silence was entirely out of character. The police immediately dispatched officers to the family residence to begin piecing together the timeline. Bochao lived with his wife, their 1-year-old son, and his elderly parents, Zhang Bowang and Ma Shuiying. According to the mother-in-law, Shuiying, the previous day had started like any other. Around noon on May 23rd, Xiaowan asked her in-laws to watch the baby, explaining that she had an urgent work meeting to attend and would be home by evening. Xiaowan was a highly driven professional who frequently handled sudden corporate crises, so her in-laws happily agreed, suspecting nothing out of the ordinary. But as dusk settled over the city, Xiaoying grew anxious. She wanted to start preparing dinner and called her daughter-in-law to check when she would arrive. The phone rang, but no one answered. By 9 o'clock that evening, Xiaoying tried again. This time, the call would not even go through. The phone was either turned off or disconnected. Assuming Xiaowan was simply caught up in a demanding meeting, Xiaoying tried to brush off her unease. 5 minutes later, her phone chimed with a text message from Xiaojuan. The message was brief and cold, stating that she needed to go to Shanghai immediately for a month-long business trip and instructing her family not to contact her. Though unsettled by the abruptness, Xiaoying went to sleep. The following morning, Xiaoying tried calling Xiaowan several times, but the phone remained unreachable. She expressed her growing dread to her son. Initially, Bochao tried to calm his mother, assuring her that he would reach his wife. But by that afternoon, their infant son developed a severe fever. With a sick child needing his mother, Bochao's attempts to contact Xiaochuan became frantic. He knew his wife better than anyone. She was fiercely attached to her smartphone, constantly managing urgent business matters, even late at night. She always carried multiple portable chargers in her purse and kept more in her car. A dead battery was simply not a plausible excuse. Sensing something was terribly wrong, Bochao contacted her company directly. The Human Resources Department delivered a shocking revelation. Xiaojuan had no urgent meetings scheduled with clients, nor had she been dispatched to Shanghai. In fact, the company had not been able to reach her either. Panic set in, and Bochao officially reported her missing. To the outside world, Bochao and Xiaowan had a flawless marriage. They had met 3 years prior at a local bar where the assertive and charismatic Xiaojuan had taken the initiative to introduce herself. They fell in love rapidly and were married within 8 months. At the time, Bochao was a successful entrepreneur running a private travel agency. Because his work required constant travel, he had asked Xiaojuan to leave her marketing job and manage their home. However, disaster soon struck his business. During an island tour organized by his agency, 2 tourists ignored safety protocols, refused to wear life jackets, and tragically drowned after falling into the sea. The resulting public outrage was devastating. Social media campaigns called for a total boycott of his agency, and Bo Chow was ultimately forced to pay the victims' families over 600,000 yuan, equivalent to about $90,000 today. The financial ruin forced him to shutter his business, leaving him drowning in debt. It was during this dark period that Xiao Yan proved her loyalty. She stepped up as the breadwinner, asking her husband to reach out to his godfather, a wealthy man named Zhao Sibo. Sibo, a man in his 60s, was the chief executive officer of a highly lucrative electronics distribution company. Familiar with Xiao Zhuan from family dinners, Sibo immediately appointed her as his human resources manager. Under his wing, she attended high-stakes meetings and expanded her professional network. Within a single year, her relentless work ethic allowed the couple to completely pay off their massive debt. She even provided her in-laws with a generous monthly allowance, earning a glowing reputation in their neighborhood as a devoted and capable daughter-in-law. With a missing person report officially filed and 24 hours passed with no ransom demands, the police ruled out a standard kidnapping for money. They cross-referenced traffic accidents and hospital admissions across the city, but no unidentified women matching her description were found. Flight, train, and bus terminals showed zero records of a Li Xiaozhuan departing the city. She had simply evaporated. Investigators turned to security footage. Cameras near the family home captured Xiaozhuan, leaving at 11:42 in the morning on May 23rd. She wore a knee-length dress and light makeup, carrying her usual handbag, which was her standard business attire. She climbed into her recently purchased car and drove off. Tracking the vehicle through the city traffic grid, police found that at 12:31 in the afternoon, she arrived near her office building. Oddly, instead of entering the main corporate parking lot, she drove her car into an adjacent, overgrown, empty plot of land. This lot lacked security cameras. 40 minutes later, the car emerged and drove toward the vast expanse of the river, disappearing from the camera network. At 1:52 in the afternoon, the vehicle reappeared, heading back toward the office, and once again vanished into the same empty lot. Because the car windows were fitted with dark sunshades, investigators could not see who was sitting behind the wheel. Detectives immediately converged on the overgrown property. A security guard named Chiang explained that Xiaozhuan often parked there. The lot actually belonged to the electronics company. Although it was slated for future development, it currently sat abandoned, surrounded by a high wall and choked with tall weeds. Chiang noted that Xiaozhuan was a nervous driver who feared scratching her new vehicle in the tight employee lot, so she preferred the spacious, empty grounds next door. Officers combed through the dense brush and eventually found her car hidden deep within the foliage, parked much further back than her usual spot. Xiaozhuan was nowhere to be seen. The interior was pristine, showing no signs of a struggle. Sitting clearly in the storage compartment was her wallet, entirely untouched, stuffed with a large amount of cash and several bank cards. The chilling implication hung in the air. If a criminal had ambushed her, why leave behind the money? This was not a robbery gone wrong. Someone had targeted Li Xiaowan specifically, and the chances of finding her alive were rapidly fading. The complete disappearance of Li Xiaozhuan cast a heavy shadow over the Jianggan District Police Department. The authorities of Wuhan City faced mounting public pressure and sharp criticism. How could a woman simply vanish without a trace in the middle of a major, heavily surveilled metropolis where security cameras watched every street corner? The victim's desperate family bombarded the detectives with questions, demanding to know when Xiaozhuan would be brought home. Urgent strategy meetings were convened, but 2 agonizing days passed. By May 25th, the investigation was facing an absolute dead end. That morning, a contracted groundskeeper named Mr. Zhang arrived at the vacant lot. Every 2 weeks, he was hired to spray herbicide and clear the overgrowth to prevent the abandoned corporate property from becoming unmanageable. He began his manual labor bright and early at 7:30 in the morning. By 10 o'clock, sweating and exhausted, he paused to rest and take a drink of water. As he sat catching his breath, his eyes wandered toward a patch of thick, uncleared brush. Something immediately looked out of place. Amidst the dense weeds, there was a patch of freshly turned, loose soil. Curious and unnerved, Mr. Zhang walked over to inspect the disturbed earth. A faint but unmistakably foul odor drifted up from the mound. His initial thought was that someone had illegally dumped a dead animal, but this was a heavily secured, privately owned parcel of land. Even he had to wait for the corporate security guards to unlock the main gates before entering. Gripping his shovel, Mr. Zhang began to scrape away the loose dirt. Just beneath the surface, his blade struck something soft. It was a large, heavy piece of brown fabric. Driven by morbid curiosity, he reached down and pulled back a corner of the cloth. Mr. Zhang stumbled backward, screaming in sheer terror. Protruding from the dirt was the pale, lifeless face of a young woman. He dropped his shovel, sprinted out of the overgrown lot, and frantically alerted the security booth. The guards rushed to the scene. Among them was security guard Chiang, who took one horrified look into the shallow grave and instantly recognized the victim. The woman buried in the dirt was Li Xiaowen, the human resources manager who had been missing for the last 48 hours. Within minutes, the quiet corporate perimeter was swarming with patrol cars, crime scene investigators, and forensic medical examiners. The massive police presence drew a crowd of curious onlookers to the outer fence, whispering about why the missing executive's body had turned up in her own company's backyard. The forensic team carefully exhumed the victim. Preliminary analysis determined that Li Xiaoxuan had been dead for approximately 2 days. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of blunt force trauma, and no evidence of a physical struggle. Her clothing was entirely intact and perfectly matched the neat, professional dress she was wearing when she left her home on May 23rd. The medical examiner concluded that the official cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. She had been strangled. Curiously, there were no fingerprint bruises on her neck. Instead, there was a distinct red ligature mark, indicating that the killer had used a flexible object to choke the life out of her. The most critical piece of evidence was discovered during the autopsy. Forensic pathologists recovered a fresh sample of seminal fluid from the victim's reproductive tract. This meant that shortly before her death, Li Xiaowan had engaged in sexual intercourse or had been the victim of a sexual assault. The genetic material left behind by the perpetrator was a massive breakthrough. Investigators also examined the brown fabric used to conceal the corpse. It was quickly identified as a large window curtain, as the circular plastic rings used to mount it to a curtain rod were still attached to the top edge. Furthermore, buried at the bottom of the earthen pit, police recovered Li Xiaoxuan's personal mobile phone. A sweeping search of the surrounding dirt yielded no distinctive footprints, but officers did find one incredibly vital clue hidden in the grass. It was a single, relatively new shirt button. The button belonged to a premium line of men's dress shirts. Because the abandoned lot was heavily restricted, detectives theorized that the killer must have accidentally dropped the button while digging the grave. The timeline presented a baffling mystery. Just 1 day prior, police had thoroughly searched that exact area when they found her parked car, and they were absolutely certain there had been no freshly dug grave at that time. This meant the killer had sneaked onto the property and buried her after the initial police search. But how? The groundskeeper, Mr. Zhang, was swiftly cleared of suspicion. The security guards also had ironclad alibis backed by time-stamped surveillance footage. They uniformly swore that no unauthorized personnel had entered the lot. How did a killer bypass security to dig a grave undetected? The police force split into 2 specialized units. One team began interrogating the corporate staff, while the other took on the grim task of notifying the victim's family. When her husband, Zhang Bochao, arrived at the police precinct, he collapsed in absolute agony. He wept hysterically, begging the detectives to tell him who had murdered his wife. Seeking to narrow down the origin of the biological evidence, The lead detective asked Bo Chow if there was any possibility his wife was having an extramarital affair. Bo Chow fiercely defended her honor, insisting she was exceptionally loyal. He also confirmed that he had been away on a business trip, meaning they had not been intimate. The biological evidence, he declared, had to belong to the monster who killed her. With the husband cleared, the detectives turned their full gaze toward the company headquarters, specifically toward the wealthy executive she answered to, Zhao Sibo. As detectives pivoted their investigation toward Li Xiaoshuan's professional circle, a scandalous portrait of the victim emerged. Xiao Wen was undeniably a crucial asset to the electronics distribution firm, widely known for her outgoing personality and ability to close business deals. However, her meteoric rise from a new employee to the human resources manager in just a few short months had generated intense jealousy and vicious gossip. While everyone knew the chief executive officer, Zhao Sibo, was her husband's godfather, numerous employees felt their relationship clearly crossed professional boundaries. Sibo was a robust man in his early 60s, and persistent office whispers painted them as much more than a mentor and his protege. Colleagues reported seeing Sibo casually resting his hand on her waist, and Xiao Juan was openly seen adjusting his ties and clothing in the hallways. Furthermore, longtime employees noted a drastic shift in company protocol. Previously, the executive director always traveled with his dedicated professional secretary. But ever since Xiao Juan joined the firm, the original secretary was permanently relegated to drafting contracts at her desk. While Xiao Juan accompanied Sibo on every out-of-town business trip, her daily, prolonged visits behind the closed doors of the executive suite only fueled the rampant rumors. The police formally summoned Zhao Sibo for questioning. The man who confidently walked into the precinct was an imposing figure. Despite being over 60 years old, he possessed a powerful build, dressed impeccably, and carried himself with absolute authority. When asked about Xiao Juan's schedule on the day she vanished, he calmly claimed total ignorance. He explained that her role required extensive networking, meaning she often arranged independent meetings with major clients and represented the company without him. Smoothly deflecting attention, Sibo eagerly suggested that his goddaughter's private social life was far more complicated than her husband believed. He casually mentioned she was popular with wealthy male clients who frequently bought her expensive luxury gifts. He also pointed out she regularly went out drinking late at night with male coworkers, which occasionally sparked petty jealousies and disruptive workplace drama. Sibo specifically steered the detectives toward a male colleague in the planning department named Deng Xiangkai. He claimed he had personally witnessed several highly inappropriate and physically intimate interactions between Xiao Chuan and Xiangkai. Playing the convincing role of the concerned family elder, Sibo stated he had recently reprimanded her in private, warning her to maintain strict professional boundaries to protect her marriage. When the investigators directly confronted him about the rampant office rumors regarding his own inappropriate relationship with the victim, Sibo let out a loud, mocking laugh. He casually brushed off the serious accusations, stating the corporate world was a cutthroat battlefield full of selfish people who constantly invented malicious lies to tear down successful individuals. Asserting he had provided all the help he possibly could, he coldly told the detectives to contact his personal secretary for any further inquiries, and abruptly stood up. But as Zhao Sibo turned to walk out of the interrogation room, a sharp-eyed female detective noticed two highly suspicious details. First, clumps of dry soil fell from the heavy soles of his expensive leather shoes directly onto the precinct floor. This was an incredibly odd detail for an elite corporate executive who spent his days walking in carpeted offices and riding in chauffeured cars. Second, she acutely realized his crisp dress shirt emitted the distinct chemical scent of unwashed, freshly manufactured clothing. The wealthy executive had changed into an entirely new garment before speaking to the police. The helpful Godfather was now the prime suspect. Despite their growing suspicions regarding Sibo, the detectives could not ignore the specific lead he had provided. They immediately attempted to contact Deng Xiangkai. Suspiciously, they discovered Zhongkai had taken an unexcused absence from work for the past 2 consecutive days, exactly matching the critical time frame of the murder. His worried co-workers had repeatedly tried calling him, but his mobile phone was continuously powered off. Believing the younger man might be actively on the run, the police quickly dispatched a tactical unit to his registered home address. However, they found Zhongkai sitting quietly in his living room, completely dressed in traditional mourning clothes. Zhongkai tearfully explained his mother had passed away suddenly, leaving him utterly devastated and consumed with arranging her funeral. He added he had lost his mobile phone during the chaotic rush to the hospital and had been unable to notify the corporate office. A thorough review of his neighborhood surveillance cameras corroborated his tragic story. Zhongkai had not left his family home or the immediate vicinity of the hospital during the critical 48 hours surrounding the murder. His alibi was absolutely ironclad. Once again, the murder investigation seemed to hit a solid brick wall. The frustrated detectives regrouped at the crime scene, staring out at the overgrown dirt lot. The physical logistics of the burial continued to haunt them. If the true killer brought a heavy shovel, dug a deep grave, and dragged a lifeless body through the thick brush, how did they completely avoid the alert security guards stationed at the main gate? It seemed impossible, unless the killer possessed a secret key to a different entrance. Upon a closer inspection of the company building's exterior architecture, the investigators noticed a metal emergency fire escape stairwell attached to the outside wall. The stairs led directly from the upper executive floors straight down into the abandoned dirt lot. The bottom metal gate was securely locked to forcefully prevent outside trespassers from entering the building. Detectives immediately questioned the corporate security team about exactly who had access to that specific lock. The guards provided a revelation that blew the case wide open. They explained their wealthy boss was notoriously strict about building security, meaning the absolute only person who held the master keys to the entire corporate building, including the rear fire escape and the adjacent empty property, was the chief executive officer himself. Armed with the knowledge that the chief executive officer controlled the absolute only set of master keys to the secluded property, detectives demanded immediate access to the locked emergency fire escape. As the heavy metal security door swung open, the investigators were immediately met with glaring, undeniable physical evidence. Clumps of dried mud, identical in color and texture to the loose soil found in the shallow grave, were scattered heavily across the cold metal steps. The chaotic trail of dirt led them directly up the narrow stairwell to a heavily secured, windowless storage room located on the 4th floor of the corporate building. The corporate facility managers confirmed to the police that this specific storage area had been completely abandoned for several years, primarily used only to house broken office furniture and outdated financial files. But in a chilling twist of the architectural layout, the heavy wooden door to this forgotten warehouse was situated at the exact end of the private hallway, leading directly out of Zhao Sibo's lavish executive office suite. The police ordered the facility manager to unlock the storage room immediately. Inside the dusty, dimly lit space, the bright beam of a detective's heavy flashlight caught the sharp glint of metal. Propped carelessly up in the far corner was a large, heavy-duty digging shovel. Its wide metal blade was thickly caked in the exact same fresh, moist soil from the abandoned lot down below. But the dirty shovel was not the only damning item left behind in the dark, stagnant room. Forensic crime scene technicians carefully collected several long strands of chemically dyed hair snagged on a splintered wooden pallet near the entryway. A rapid visual comparison at the scene suggested the hair perfectly matched the distinct color, length, and texture of Li Xiaoshuan's hair. With a massive mountain of circumstantial evidence rapidly building against the wealthy and powerful executive, the police officially designated Zhao Sibo as their primary murder suspect. They immediately dispatched a tactical squad to bring him back into the local precinct for a second, much more aggressive interrogation. However, when detectives stormed into the corporate suite, the executive was nowhere to be found. His personal secretary, looking visibly panicked by the sudden police presence, informed the officers that her boss had hurriedly packed a leather briefcase and bolted from the building just moments earlier. She had absolutely no idea where he was going. When the police aggressively pressed her for any unusual behavior that morning, she hesitantly recalled a highly suspicious and frantic request. Shortly after 6 o'clock in the morning, long before regular office hours began, Zhao Sibo had frantically called her mobile phone. He ordered her to immediately purchase a brand new, premium white dress shirt from a nearby luxury boutique and rush it directly to his private office. Confused but obedient to her powerful boss, she had delivered the fresh garment. The detectives instantly realized this was the exact same sharply creased, chemical-smelling shirt the executive had worn during his initial, highly deceptive police interview. The investigative team immediately secured a judicial search warrant for the massive executive office suite. The luxurious room proved to be a treasure trove of grim, undeniable evidence. Detectives immediately noticed that one of the heavy, brown fabric panels from the large window curtains was conspicuously missing. The remaining curtain panels were an exact material and visual match to the thick shroud used to wrap the victim's battered body. Streaks of dried, dark dirt stained the expensive imported carpet near the doorway. Digging methodically through the executive wastebasket, forensic officers found the discarded, heavily mud-stained dress shirt the executive had hastily taken off that morning. It was missing a single, specific button from the cuff. The remaining buttons perfectly matched the solitary one found resting in the damp grass next to the shallow grave. Digging deeper into the trash bin, investigators found a shocking amount of recently used condoms, painting a stark and vulgar contradiction to the supposedly professional corporate environment. The corporate cleaning staff provided even further damning context to the grim discoveries. The head housekeeper revealed to the detectives that Zhao Sibo had explicitly ordered her not to clean his private suite that specific day. When asked if she had noticed anything highly unusual in the past few months, she nervously admitted that she frequently found used condoms scattered recklessly across the executive suite, sometimes shoved lazily between leather sofa cushions or kicked carelessly under the heavy, solid mahogany desk. Whenever she attempted to clean them up, the chief executive officer aggressively warned her that the activities in his private office were highly confidential corporate matters. He viciously threatened her with immediate termination and financial ruin if she ever spoke a single word of the mess to anyone. The final, devastating piece of the puzzle lay hidden deep inside the locked bottom drawer of the executive desk. Detectives forcefully pried it open and uncovered a thick stack of vehicle purchasing documents. The official paperwork proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Zhao Sibo was the actual legal owner of the brand new luxury car driven daily by Li Xiaowan. Realizing the investigative net was rapidly closing around him, the wealthy executive attempted a desperate, last-minute escape from the city. Anticipating his sudden flight, the police had instantly flashed his identification and photograph across all public and private transportation networks, setting up heavy, armed drag nets at every single bus depot, train station, and commercial airport in the region. Their swift and decisive action paid off spectacularly. Just as Zhao Sibo arrived frantically at the International Departures Terminal, aggressively attempting to purchase the earliest available ticket to the Republic of Singapore, heavily armed airport security forces swarmed him. He was violently wrestled to the polished floor, thrown into heavy steel handcuffs, and dragged kicking and screaming back to the downtown interrogation room. True to his arrogant, entitled nature, the executive immediately went on the furious offensive. He screamed wildly at the detectives, furiously demanding immediate access to his expensive private attorney, and loudly claiming he was on his way to sign a massive, multi-million-dollar international corporate contract. He angrily threatened to hold the entire police department personally and financially responsible for the catastrophic loss of his crucial overseas business deals. The seasoned lead detective simply sat quietly across the cold metal table and let the wealthy man completely exhaust his furious rage. Then, slowly and methodically, the police laid out the inescapable, suffocating truth. They presented the glossy crime scene photographs of the missing window curtain, the heavily encrypted text messages traced directly from the dead victim's phone to his private mobile number, the soiled luxury shirt with the perfectly matching severed button, the muddy digging shovel hidden just steps from his executive desk, and the heavy ring of master keys dangling from his own tailored pocket. The overwhelming, crushing weight of the physical evidence finally shattered his arrogant, untouchable facade. The small interrogation room fell into a long, incredibly heavy silence. The powerful, feared chief executive officer finally slumped forward in his chair, his face burying deeply into his trembling hands. His voice, now entirely stripped of all its former booming bravado, echoed coldly and hollowly off the bare concrete walls. He slowly looked up at the grim-faced detectives and stated, "Fine, I confess to everything. I am the one who killed her." Sitting heavily in the cold metal chair of the police interrogation room, the disgraced chief executive officer finally began to unburden his deeply guarded secrets. Stripped of his tailored suits and corporate authority, Zhao Sibo recounted the twisted origins of his fatal relationship with his godson's wife. The tragic saga began innocently enough during a casual family dinner at the home of his godson, Zheng Bochao. It was there that Sibo truly noticed Li Xiaozhuan for the first time. She was sharp, charismatic, and relentlessly ambitious. Throughout the evening, Xiaowan showered the older man with eloquent flattery, skillfully steering the conversation toward her desire for a more challenging and lucrative career. Recognizing her natural social grace and persuasive communication skills, Sibo agreed to bring her into his highly profitable electronics distribution firm. Initially, she was tasked with running minor corporate errands and observing the daily business operations. However, Xiaowan possessed a phenomenal aptitude for corporate strategy. She quickly charmed the firm's most difficult clients and smoothly navigated complex business negotiations, proving herself to be an absolutely indispensable asset. Recognizing her immense value, Sibo swiftly promoted her to the position of human resources manager and began bringing her along as his primary associate on all critical out-of-town business trips. The professional boundary between the powerful executive and his ambitious protege shattered completely following the successful closure of a massive, multi-million-dollar distribution contract. To celebrate the monumental corporate victory, Sibo invited several wealthy business partners and Xiaozhuan to an exclusive, high-end banquet. The expensive alcohol flowed freely throughout the night, and by the end of the lavish celebration, Sibo was heavily intoxicated. As the distinguished guests departed, Xiaozhuan took total charge of her inebriated boss, firmly supporting his heavy weight as she guided him out of the upscale restaurant and helped him into the spacious back seat of his luxury corporate vehicle. As they sat close together in the dim, quiet light of the car interior, the heavy influence of the liquor severely clouded Sibo's judgment. Overcome by a sudden, reckless impulse, he leaned forward and kissed his godson's young wife. To his absolute shock, Xiaowan did not pull away, nor did she express any moral outrage. Instead, she eagerly reciprocated his aggressive advances, gently stroking his face and pulling him closer. That very night, right there in the back seat of the parked vehicle, they crossed an unforgivable line and engaged in a deeply shameful sexual encounter. The following morning, the heavy fog of intoxication lifted, leaving the wealthy executive entirely consumed by overwhelming guilt and intense panic. The dark reality of what he had done to his devoted godson was a crushing weight on his conscience. He immediately summoned Zhao Zhuan into his private executive suite, determined to definitively end the highly inappropriate relationship before it could destroy their respective families. He desperately pleaded with her to forget everything that had transpired in the vehicle, begging her to write it off as a terrible, drunken mistake. But Xiao Zhuan had an entirely different agenda. Rather than agreeing to a quiet and respectful resolution, she calmly walked over to the large office windows and slowly pulled the heavy brown curtains shut, the very same thick curtains that would eventually serve as her burial shroud. She then confidently walked back to his massive mahogany desk, completely bypassed the guest chairs, and seated herself directly onto his lap. Looking him straight in the eyes, she delivered a chillingly calculated proposition. She whispered that the dark secret belonged only to the two of them. She boldly stated that she knew his elderly wife was entirely incapable of satisfying his intimate needs, and she enthusiastically offered to gladly take on the role of fulfilling his physical desires. Sibo's weak moral resolve completely collapsed under her aggressive seduction. From that fateful morning forward, their highly illicit affair became a daily, deeply entrenched routine. For over an entire year, the two operated like a pair of reckless young lovers, constantly stealing moments of intense intimacy whenever they could. Because of Sibo's incredibly high physical drive, they engaged in sexual relations almost daily, frequently locking the heavy solid door of his private office or booking adjoining luxury hotel suites during their frequent out-of-town business trips. Sibo's lawful wife had been battling a severe, debilitating form of terminal cancer for a very long time, rendering her physically frail and utterly unable to maintain an intimate relationship. In stark contrast, the vibrant and attentive Xiao Wan made the aging executive feel entirely rejuvenated, as if he had been miraculously granted a second lease on his youth. In return for her constant devotion and physical services, Sibo showered her with extravagant wealth. He frequently transferred large sums of money into her private bank accounts and purchased an endless array of premium designer handbags and luxury clothing for her to flaunt. However, the initial passionate infatuation slowly morphed into a highly toxic cycle of greed, suspicion, and deep resentment. Xiao Zhuan's financial appetite proved to be utterly insatiable. No matter how much wealth the older executive provided, she continuously demanded more, constantly pushing the absolute boundaries of his generosity. Her most recent and aggressive demand was for a brand new, highly expensive luxury automobile, which Sibo ultimately purchased and registered under his own legal name to keep her superficially satisfied. But the massive financial drain was not the only source of growing tension. Malicious whispers began to circulate within his elite network of business partners. Several wealthy clients made thinly veiled, crude jokes, implying that his goddaughter was exceptionally skilled at privately servicing men. The humiliating implication that she was trading sexual favors for corporate contracts deeply infuriated the proud and possessive executive. Furthermore, Sibo's own direct observations began to confirm his absolute darkest suspicions. He personally witnessed Xiao Zhuan warmly embracing and passionately kissing Deng Shengkai, the younger male co-worker from the company's planning department. When a furiously jealous Sibo confronted her about the blatant infidelity in the office, Xiao Zhuan dismissively lied straight to his face, claiming it was merely a harmless misunderstanding caused by a deceptive visual angle. The wealthy executive realized with sickening clarity that the young woman he had risked his entire family and reputation for was ruthlessly manipulating him, draining his wealth while simultaneously deceiving both her lawful husband and her powerful lover. The dangerous stage was perfectly set for a violently tragic confrontation. On the morning of May 23rd, the simmering tension between the wealthy executive and his ambitious goddaughter reached a boiling point. Zhao Sibo, sitting in his lavish suite, sent a coded text message to Li Xiaozhuan, instructing her to come to the corporate office. When she arrived, her demeanor was entirely transactional. She immediately began pressing him for more money, complaining about her personal expenses, and demanding a larger cut of the company's recent profits. Sibo, trying to maintain some control over the deteriorating situation, calmly told her to wait until their next massive distribution contract was officially signed. He promised he would reward her with a substantial financial bonus at that time. Temporarily pacified by the promise of future wealth, Xiao Wan agreed to stop arguing. The two locked the heavy mahogany door of the executive suite and engaged in intimate relations. Crucially, during this specific encounter, they did not use any form of physical protection. This arrogant oversight would ultimately leave behind the undeniable biological evidence the forensic pathologist later discovered during the autopsy. However, the brief moment of physical intimacy did absolutely nothing to quell Xiao Zhen's aggressive greed. The moment they finished, she resumed her relentless demands. As she coldly adjusted her clothing, she began to viciously criticize Sibo's financial support of his own family. She bluntly told him he needed to stop wasting his vast wealth on his terminally ill wife, cruelly stating that the elderly woman was going to die very soon anyway. The sheer callousness of her words deeply shocked the older man, but Xiao Zhuan was just getting started. She then aggressively demanded that Sibo legally transfer a significant portion of his lucrative corporate shares directly into her name. She argued that holding actual ownership in the company was the only way the other disrespectful employees would finally fear and respect her authority. When Sibo remained completely silent, his face darkening with barely suppressed rage, Xiao Zhuan took her psychological manipulation a fatal step further. Pacing around the luxurious office, she began to openly mock his marriage. She tauntingly wondered aloud what would happen if his frail, cancer-stricken wife discovered their sordid affair. She cruelly theorized that the sheer emotional shock of the betrayal would likely trigger a fatal medical crisis, instantly killing the old woman. And if his wife died, Xiao Zhuan sneered, the path would be perfectly clear for her to officially take over as the new Mrs. Zhao. The abhorrent disrespect toward the woman who had helped Sibo build his business empire completely shattered his last ounce of restraint. He stated to the detectives that, despite his own terrible infidelity, he still deeply respected his wife, who had suffered alongside him through their early years of extreme poverty. Blinded by a sudden, explosive fury, Sibo stepped forward and delivered a vicious slap directly across Xiao Wan's face. The physical strike momentarily stunned her, but she quickly recovered and unleashed a hysterical tirade. She began screaming at the top of her lungs, fiercely threatening to publicly expose everything. She vowed to march straight to his dying wife and tell her every filthy detail of their affair. And then she would broadcast their illicit relationship to the entire corporate staff, completely destroying his carefully curated professional reputation and his family. Panic and intense rage collided within Sibo's mind. Operating on pure, violent instinct to silence her, he forcefully shoved the young woman backward. Xiao Zhuan lost her balance and crashed heavily onto the floor. Before she could scream again, Sibo lunged on top of her. Grabbing a piece of fabric nearby, he wrapped it tightly around her neck and pulled with all his formidable, adrenaline-fueled strength. He held the makeshift ligature ruthlessly tight, staring into her eyes as she struggled, until her body went completely limp. When Sibo finally snapped out of his violent rage, he realized with absolute horror that his goddaughter was dead. Knowing he had to act with extreme speed to avoid detection, he formulated a frantic plan. He quietly slipped out of his private office through the rear executive exit, completely avoiding the main employee corridors. He hurried down to the adjacent vacant lot, unlocked her luxury vehicle, and maneuvered it out onto the bustling city streets. His initial strategy was to drive the car directly to the massive Yangtze River, where he planned to permanently dump the vehicle and the body into the rushing water. However, as he navigated toward the expansive riverbanks, he quickly realized the area was heavily populated, with daytime pedestrians and numerous security cameras. The risk of being seen in broad daylight was simply too great. Abandoning the river plan, Sibo executed a rapid tactical pivot. He drove the vehicle back toward his corporate headquarters, timing his arrival perfectly to coincide with the standard midday lunch hour. He knew from years of strict observation that the corporate security guards would be distracted or on their meal breaks. He smoothly bypassed the main employee parking structure and drove the car deep into the overgrown brush of the abandoned company property. Sneaking back up the external metal fire escape, he managed to secretly drag Xiao Wan's lifeless body up the stairs and temporarily conceal her inside the abandoned fourth-floor storage room. It was inside this dusty space that he noticed the heavy metal digging shovel, which immediately sparked his final plan for a permanent burial on his own property. To buy himself the crucial time needed to execute this cover-up, Sibo stole Xiao Wan's mobile phone and deliberately drafted the cold text message to her anxious mother-in-law, falsely claiming she had been dispatched to Shanghai. He believed this calculated digital lie would successfully prevent the family from calling the authorities, giving him ample time to bury his terrible secret forever. Early on the morning of May 25th, 2 days after the fatal confrontation, Zhao Sibo arrived at the corporate headquarters with a grim objective. He needed to permanently hide the rotting evidence of his crime. Walking through the main entrance just after dawn, he casually greeted the overnight security staff, smoothly explaining that he had forgotten highly sensitive financial documents required for an urgent international business trip. His calm, authoritative demeanor raised absolutely no red flags. Once inside, he immediately bypassed his executive suite and headed straight for the abandoned fourth-floor storage room where Li Xiaoshuan's body lay hidden. Realizing that carrying a dead woman down the exterior fire escape in broad daylight was an immense risk, Sibo formulated a chillingly practical solution. He returned to his lavish office, violently tore down one of the heavy brown window curtains, and brought it back to the warehouse. He callously rolled his goddaughter's stiffening corpse into the thick fabric, transforming her into an unidentifiable, bulky package. Heaving the heavy burden onto his shoulders, the 60-something executive carefully navigated the steep metal steps of the emergency exit, descending into the overgrown, walled-off property below. Grabbing the large metal shovel he had stashed earlier, he began to dig furiously into the damp earth. The physical exertion was intense, and in his frantic rush to hollow out a deep enough grave, his premium white dress shirt became heavily soiled with wet mud. It was during this violent physical labor that a single identifying button snagged and popped off his cuff, tumbling silently into the tall grass where detectives would eventually find it. Sibo haphazardly dumped the shrouded body into the shallow pit, kicked the loose dirt over it, and hastily retreated back up the fire escape. He genuinely believed he had executed the perfect crime. However, he had absolutely no idea that the contracted groundskeeper was scheduled to clear the brush that exact same morning. As the old proverb dictates, man proposes, but fate disposes. No matter how meticulously the wealthy executive tried to bury his sins, the truth was unearthed just hours later, when the complete, horrifying details of the official police confession were finally revealed to Zhang Boqiao. The grieving husband completely mentally collapsed. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal was almost entirely incomprehensible. Not only had his beloved wife been brutally murdered, but she had also been carrying on a prolonged, highly illicit affair behind his back. Furthermore, the man who had stolen her affections and ultimately choked the life out of her was his own godfather, a man Boqiao had deeply trusted and looked up to as a revered family elder. The sickening realization that Xiao Zhuan had played the role of the perfect, dutiful wife and mother while simultaneously orchestrating a secret life of extreme greed and infidelity left Boqiao psychologically shattered. He was forced to grapple with the agonizing fact that the woman he loved had placed a devastatingly large set of metaphorical horns upon his head, entirely destroying his family from the inside out. The legal retribution for the wealthy chief executive officer was incredibly swift and absolutely unforgiving. During the highly publicized criminal trial, the prosecution presented an airtight case, highlighting the profound cruelty, the calculated cover-up, and the severe abuse of corporate power. After carefully reviewing the overwhelming mountain of physical evidence and Sibo's own recorded confession, the High Court found him entirely guilty of intentional, premeditated murder. Because of the exceptionally gruesome nature of the crime and his remorseless attempts to conceal the body, the presiding judge handed down the maximum possible sentence under the law. Zhao Sibo was officially sentenced to death, effectively ending his reign as a powerful corporate titan. The catastrophic fallout from the murder rapidly consumed Sibo's entire business empire. Following his highly publicized arrest, financial regulators and corporate investigators descended upon his electronics distribution company. A thorough audit of his private residence and executive office uncovered a massive trove of fraudulent purchasing receipts and widespread evidence of severely compromised product quality. Without its corrupt leader to maintain the illusion of success, the once lucrative firm plunged into immediate financial ruin, permanently shutting its doors just weeks after the murder trial concluded. Ultimately, the tragic death of Li Xiaohuan completely annihilated two separate families. Sibo's elderly wife, who was already suffering terribly from terminal cancer, was forced to spend her final days grappling with the horrifying reality that the husband she had built a life with was a deceitful murderer and a chronic adulterer. Meanwhile, a young boy was left to grow up without a mother, and a husband was left entirely broken by an unimaginable double betrayal. The sensational case sent massive shockwaves throughout the city of Wuhan, serving as a grim, cautionary tale about the dark, destructive power of unchecked ambition and the rapid decay of basic human morality. It stands as a chilling reminder that if the victim had simply known when to stop, if she had been able to successfully restrain her insatiable lust for luxury and power, she might never have met such a violent, terrifying end. In the ruthless pursuit of wealth, there is an old, profound saying that perfectly encapsulates this devastating tragedy. Money is a highly effective servant, but it is an absolutely terrifying and merciless master. Word count, 899. That concludes the chilling case of Li Xiaohuan and the dark secrets buried in the corporate lot. What do you think about the incredibly complex web of betrayal in this story? Do you believe the death penalty was the only appropriate justice for a crime of this magnitude? Or should the toxic nature of their relationship be considered? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you appreciated this deep dive into criminal psychology, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more true crime investigations.